Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Living Systems Collaboratory. I'm John Crawford here with Roxy Shohadi and Andrea Polli, and we are so honored to have you with us today, Andrea. I'll give a quick introduction to the Living Systems Collaboratory for those who are just tuning in for the first time, and then we'll turn it over to you, Andrea. So the Living Systems Collaboratory, co-sponsored by the Buckminster Fuller Institute, the Design Science Studio aspect of the Buckminster Fuller Institute, and Ritual, in partnership with my institution, the University of California, Irvine, and my lab, the Emergent Media Research Lab, is co-organizing the Living Systems Collaboratory, in which group of student artists and designers are developing creative projects that aid people in perceiving various aspects of life as a unified whole. We're thinking about the biological, social, ecological, philosophical, spiritual, mathematical, political, and technological dimensions of life. Thinking of this in the framework of the idea of living systems and systems philosophy. Systems philosophy helps us to understand that humans occupy a self-organizing living system, which is our planet, with an inherent capability to sustain life. And living systems in this construct are cognitive entities with an inherent tendency to structure themselves in nonlinear network patterns capable of performing highly complex functions with minimum effort. The really important aspect of this is this notion of nonlinear thinking and nonlinearity. The collaboratory itself has a 4-month time span. We're about 2/3 of the way through, and we'll be having a showcase of the work of our wonderful collaboratory participants at the end of March. I'm very interested to see how all of this comes together, and we invited Andrea to speak to us to give us an overview of some of her work in a related area. Roxy, why don't I turn it over to you to tell us a little bit more about the Buckminster Fuller Institute and Ritual and how all these groups are working together.
Thank you, John. Yeah, so the Design Science Studio is a program that was created by the Buckminster Fuller Institute and Ritual in partnership. And it has been, it's kind of what, as John mentioned, is what the Living Systems Laboratory is nested within. And this partnership is really been built to support building the capacity of a creative community to be able to come together and work towards a world that works for 100% of life in the shortest possible time through spontaneous cooperation without offense to anyone. And so we're supporting artists to imagine this regenerative future and to propel us through their creative outputs. And so the Living Systems Collaboratory was connected and created within that frame with the University of California, Irvine. And it has creators who are specifically in the Design Science Studio working towards this mission whose work is directed towards living systems and systems philosophy. And so helping us to really bridge biophilic design and biomimicry and understanding how our natural living world can really be an avenue for helping to bridge the way that we're building and refining our systems forward so that we can have this world that works for all. And it's kind of nested within this design science decade, which is a decade-long mission that we can see that, from in the course of a decade, Buckminster Fuller said, we have made all the right tools for all the wrong reasons, but we have everything we need to retool and actually make a future that works for all life in the span of 10 years. And so we've rekindled that vision that he had in 1965 for this era that we're in now. and the Design Science Studio, the Living Systems Collaboratory, we're all sort of helping propel that mission, and seeing that, through our creative expression, through the power of art and design as this cross-cultural language for systemic change, we can really build bridges for these positive futures, to be able to feel them, see them, and move towards them. So really honored to be building bridges, interdisciplinary bridges between art and science. And it is such an honor to have you with us here today, Andrea, to help us strengthen these understandings and see how some of these can be applied in the long term through the work that you've been doing in the world.
So thank you so much, Roxy. And before I introduce Andrea, I'll just mention that we will be having time at the end of the talk for questions, a Q&A. If you do have questions or areas you'd like Andrea to speak more on, please post your questions, comments, or requests for more information in your Facebook or YouTube comments, and we'll be monitoring those. And we'll have a Q&A at the end of Andrea's talk. So Andrea Polli is an environmental artist and writer who uses interactive websites, various kinds of broadcasting and web-based applications, as well as mobile apps and performances to reach a very wide audience. Her work blends art and science to create media and technology artworks primarily related to environmental issues. She's shown her work at the Whitney and the Field Museum of Natural History, and has received various awards and has done many, many residencies. She's produced hundreds of works. She has a joint appointment in the College of Fine Arts and the School of Engineering as a professor at the University of New Mexico, and does obviously a lot of work there connecting art, science, and technology, as well as her broader work in the field. So Andrea Polli, welcome. We're so happy to have you here.
Thank you so much, John and Roxy. It's a great honor to present to a group that's doing such important work. And I hope that I can share something that will be maybe useful or meaningful. If I could share my screen. So the name of my presentation is called It's a Question of Risk. It's a Question of Risk. And it actually comes from a interview that I did with an IPC contributing author, one of the scientists that received the Nobel Prize a while back. And he was talking about, I'll say more about him in a later in the presentation, but he was talking about, this was his definition of our response to, our necessary response to climate change, is to really look at the risks and act accordingly. So let me move forward here. So I thought about, when I thought about this talk, I thought about 6 strategies that have been useful to me and that I've seen other artists and designers use in relation to art, science, and climate change. So these are imagine consequences, promote public engagement, community science, as opposed to citizen science, collaborate in the laboratory and field, encourage open data, and create collaborations within and between institutions and communities. So I'll present some ways that I perhaps have tried to use these strategies, but I think you'll see as the presentation goes on, there's a lot of fluidity between them. So first, imagining consequences. So this really comes from my beginnings as an artist working with issues to do with climate. Back in the late 80s and early 90s, I did a lot of work with chaotic systems and fractals. That was the time when that was just becoming popular. And my skill set was computer programming. So I programmed a lot of these algorithms and used them to create sound and visual images and other types of things. And I knew that those specifically chaotic attractors, were simplified models of air moving through the atmosphere that were used by meteorologists. But I didn't understand how much things had moved forward from that by the early 2000s. And but in 2000, I met a meteorologist named Glenn Van Nau in an art science conference, actually in California. And we started talking. He talked to me about how detailed climate models had become, and weather models, so much so that you could recreate a storm, the data in a storm, using these weather models. So we decided to collaborate and create this project called Atmospherics WeatherWorks, where we selected 2 historic storms that hit the East Coast of the US. And my collaborator, Glenn, modeled 16 geographic points with 9 parameters of data: wind speed, wind direction, temperature, atmospheric pressure, parameters like that. And I had the opportunity to present this as a sound installation using a 16-channel sound system at Engine 21 in New York City, and then created this online version on the Whitney Art Port, which is part of their permanent collection. So I'll just play for you a little bit of a little bit of the resulting sound. And I think for me, I was really excited about the fact that I wrote a computer program, a platform that was static in the way that it interpreted the parameters, the data, but the data itself changed the character of the sound in a way that my meteorologist collaborator, could understand aspects of the storm. So for example, in this hurricane, most of the heavy activity of wind and the violent activity happens at ground level. As we know, when a hurricane happens, it's very violent. But up high in the atmosphere, which is what we're listening to now at 60,000 feet, for example, on the top of the atmosphere, it's relatively calm. That's why you can fly over a hurricane and see it and be relatively safe. So if I go to the same computer program filtering the data for sea level, for example, you can hear, first off, much lower temperatures and a lot more chaotic action and kind of that ethereal sound at 60,000 feet. So I won't play too much of that. So the methods that I used to create those sonifications came from my interest in soundscapes. And I have done a lot of work with soundscapes, soundscape recording, and collaboration with other artists that use soundscape. This came from the World Forum for Acoustic Ecology and the World Soundscape Project, of course, created by Murray Schaefer and Hildegard Westerkamp and a number of other soundscape artists and researchers. And one of the things that I did in New York City was to create the Sound Seeker, which was an online platform for people to submit their soundscape recordings. And so when I created the sonifications, I was thinking not about how can I use this data to create music, but how can I use this data to create a soundscape. And that was helped very much by the 16-channel surround sound, which is, of course, how we experience sound in space. Now, I think you're probably thinking, well, there's not a lot of that has to do with imagining consequences with that, because that's looking at the past. But I found, working with meteorologists and climate scientists that those models can become ways in which to project into the future and imagine the future. As we know from seeing all these projections of the red globe, all these projections of what's going to happen with climate change. So that I was able to use some of those models working with Cynthia Rosenzweig of the Climate Research Group at NASA Goddard Institute to create Heat in the Heartbeat of the City that projects heat intensities in the summers at Central Park, the heart of New York City, using actual data from the 90s, then projecting into the 2010s, 2020s, up to the 2080s. And again, using a soundscape model. Also had a chance to work with a ice scientist who modeled weather at the exact point of the North Pole. I became really, at around 2004 and 5, a lot of information came out about melting at the poles, and specifically at the North Pole. And so I became really interested in trying to address that somehow. So in this piece, I found the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association has a webcam that they deploy that gets as close to the North Pole as possible every summer. It floats around quite a bit. So I took images from that webcam in a computer program and created a time-lapse video that would be constantly adding the images from the webcam onto the end, and then created a 4-channel sonification using a model, a weather model that gave the weather situation at the North Pole. So of course, there's no weather station exactly at the North Pole, so it's necessary to use those models to look at different latitudes and longitudes. So another strategy that I've used quite a lot, and I think is really important when you think about, when you understand that human factors are the largest forcing factor of climate change today. So human behavior really needs to change or modify to help to stop climate change. So promoting public engagement and understanding is something that I think is a really important strategy. One of the projects that I did, I had been doing a lot of these data intensive weather related projects, and I wanted to work with tangible materials. You know, being an artist, I wanted to work with the materials, but what is the material when you're working with atmospheres and weather? And so I thought about things that could float in the air and be aerosols. And I created this project called Cloud Car. It was really inspired by Dylan Scafidio's Blur building. But in this case, I created a car that was covered with a mist system. This is our portable version with a canisters of NOx and compressed water. And a cloud is created around a car. This is at the New York Hall of Science. And in conjunction with this, we would find a lot of, the idea was to get people to stop and look and say, what's going on with this? And then at that point, a group of us would be able to hand the person a fact sheet that says, if you have to drive, here's a way to decrease your emissions. So the idea of this cloud was that, you know, if you could see your emissions, what would they look like? Now, the first time I presented this, it's water mist, was on the streets of New York City as a part of a parking day project, when parking spots are taken over and turned into art projects. And I attracted the attention of New York's bravest, of course, the fire department. And I just always love to show this. This is my proudest moment as an artist, and in my opinion, the fire fighters put the Cloud Car sticker on their fire truck. So I love that. The mist then for me became really interesting because it offered the possibility of a platform for projection. So this is outside of Death Valley, and I was able to project stories onto the mist on the car. And this has been, I did cloud car in many different places around the world with many different kind of cars. I took, the idea of the project is to use a local car. And I had the opportunity to show cloud car and also this work called Breather in at Parco Arte Vivente in Turin, in Torino, Italy, which is the home of the Fiat. And so had the opportunity to get these vintage Fiats, and Breather is actually a car covered in inside of a bouncy with a blow up system that expands and contracts over the course of about a minute to be like breathing, or as if the car is trying to breathe. And then this came from an experience that I had in New Delhi, India, where I literally felt like I had a plastic bag over my head because I was having such a hard time breathing. Okay, so on to community science. And I'm saying community science rather than citizen science because as much as I love the term citizen science, I have found that sometimes the identity of a citizen is not something that everyone can enjoy. It felt to me like it was a little bit exclusive to say citizen science, as if this is only for citizens. So I like to say community science. And one of the things that I have done in that realm was a project called Hello Weather. I got 5 semi-professional weather stations and shared the data online and invited people to create projects using that data. So both in a way, the weather stations were presented in a really prominent way at community centers. This is at a gallery in Soho. And then, so there was some visibility there, but then also an invitation to do projects. And one of the things that was done with Hello Weather, that I did with Hello Weather, was atmosphere.org, which it was getting the weather stations to tweet. So this was the early days of the Internet of Things, and the Tower Bridge in London was tweeting. And so we had this idea to have these weather stations tweet. And every day, whatever weather station you subscribe to, not only my 5, but every weather station on the Weather Underground network, you would get a once a day tweet that was under 140 character piece of famous quote that was tied to what the weather situation was that day at that location. So we had developed over 2,000 of these quotes in a matrix that tied to windy and rainy and snowy and cold and all these kinds of things, and would send out the tweets that way. So another strategy, collaboration in the laboratory and field. I have been really fortunate to have been able to go to both several areas in the Arctic and in Antarctica. When I started doing that project Endpoint, I was looking at these weather stations at the North Pole, and I really wanted to try to go there somehow to be there physically, that idea of, tangibility. And I didn't find a lot of opportunities at that point to go to north above the Arctic Circle, but I found opportunities to go to Antarctica through the National Science Foundation Artists and Writers residency. So I went to Antarctica. This is the pole, the previous dome station. I love this with the Buckminster Fuller, to show this with the Buckminster Fuller Institute. That was the first research station at the South Pole station. So I had a chance to spend a day there. Spent most of my time in the dry valleys near McMurdo Station. This was our camp there under a mountain, which in fact was named after Ray, the woman scientist who ran the station and who was there. So it's kind of amazing to go to a place where the mountains are named after the people that you're interacting with. And this is a team that I worked with of scientists, Matt Hoffman, Hassan Basajic, and Liz Kaufman. I spent most of the time with Hassan in the center there, who's an engineer who was gathering data from weather stations all around the Dry Valleys. And the Dry Valleys is actually one of the longest running climate weather monitoring program in the world. And in fact, we went to one weather station. I went to one weather station with Hassan, and the date on the first station there was his birth year. So that was pretty amazing. So this is Andreas Fischlin. He's the IPCC coordinating author, scientist, and winner of the Nobel Prize that I talked about who said it's a question of risk. And this is just one small quote from several interviews that I did with Andreas. I ended up, who also happens to be a great musician, I ended up doing about 30 or 40 interviews with scientists. And I think this has been for me a really important strategy in developing work, understanding the science, and figuring out how to help give the science a voice. When I went to Antarctica in 2007, 2008, the scientists were telling me that there was a war on science, and it was a time when scientists who were federally funded, couldn't say the words climate change. And so I, as an artist, was able to, through my work, give them a voice in venues that are maybe more open, more reachable to the public than esoteric scientific journals, but also it allowed them to feel very free about speaking their mind about this. And I can talk more about that if people have questions. So in Antarctica, I did two projects, one Ground Truth, which was a video exploring the physicality, that tangible experience of being on the ground, and the data and what those relationships are in the field. And I did an album called Sonic Antarctica. It's on the Grün Recorder label, which is a German label, and it combines field recordings, soundscape recordings of Antarctica, sonifications of Antarctic data, and the voices of scientists from some of these interviews. So this is, and actually, let me play you a little piece of that.
We're at the Taylor Glacier Met Station. The main thing that we're trying to do is monitoring long-term climate, as opposed to seeing what the weather will be like the next couple of days.
So this is the voice of Hassan Basajic, and that's him on Taylor Glacier when we visited there and downloaded the data. So, and then the third outcome from my work in Antarctica is a book called Far Field Digital Culture, Climate Change in the Pole, co-authored with Jane Marshing, and with contributions from many artists and people working in art science at both the North and the South. So another way in which I've been working in collaboration with scientists and in doing art science collaboration has been doing some bioart. I'm so excited about the fact that you all are focused on that. This is, of course, Orn Cats, and this was a workshop that I took where we are culturing mouse cells in these plastic containers here. And this is at the a new bioart lab that was just being created in Helsinki. in Finland. And of course, this is Jonat Sur, Oren's partner and collaborator that we worked with. So I have had the pleasure to do a lot of these kinds of workshops and collaborations. I worked with the Biohack Academy, did some of my own lab work. This is a setup growing kombucha mothers or scobies and drying them and then turning them into fabric and wearables. And this is a piece called the Bio Kitchen, where I grew SCOBY to create a projection screen, as well as built this structure that became a platform for a number of different performances and events having to do with microbes in our daily life. So this is the Bio Kitchen at the Explora Science Museum in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And it's currently at my university, at the University of New Mexico, in the art department courtyard that we have. And we use it for a number of different kind of outdoor events and for shade. And it has solar panels that people use to charge up their cell phones and things like that. And this design comes from an electron microscope image of some of the plants that we've been working with. So another bioart related project that I've done is called the Tea House. And this is a structure created with the same framework of a 10 by 10 traditional Japanese tea house. And I presented this in a number of different places, and it's been really surprising. For example, in this image, in Springfield, Missouri, there was a trained Japanese tea master who said that she would like to perform ceremonies, perform tea ceremonies in the tea house. So that's been really great. But the main idea of the tea house is to look at the movements and choreography of work in a science lab and relate that to other types of choreography. So the back of a on the back wall of a traditional Japanese tea house, there's something called the tokonomo, and that's an image that represents something that's happening. And in our case, we projected a film that was created from the movements of in a science lab doing a extraction of, in a chemistry lab doing an extraction of caffeine. So you sort of see these different movements happen over time. Another thing in a traditional Japanese tea house is that there's usually a fountain in front. And in our case, we created a hydroponic system for growing plants that are used to drink tea. And we also had available a microscope to allow visitors to look at the leaves microscopically that they were drinking in their tea. And, you know, I think it was something really surprising with this artwork that I didn't expect to happen was people saying as they were picking plants and putting them in the hot water to drink tea, local plants. People said, well, I never really realized that tea was a plant. It was a leaf and you could just make tea. And that was really surprising to me and made me really think about how disconnected many people have become from their food supply and their nourishment. So another strategy to encourage open data. So this has been a really important strategy to me relative to doing a lot of kind of computer related computational sustainability kind of work. So I had the opportunity to, from my work with weather stations, I had the opportunity to get a particulate sensor donated to me about 10 years ago that measures PM 2.5. So PM 2.5 is a particle mostly caused by the burning of fossil fuels that is very tiny, 2.5 microns, and a grain of salt is about 80 microns. So you can imagine this 2.5, very small, easily lodged in the heart and the lungs, and causes a number of different problems. So I got this nephelometer particulate sensor, donated and created this work called Particle Falls. First shown in San Jose, and now I've shown in many different locations around the world, including Paris for the COP21, in conjunction with the COP21 conference. So what happens in Particle Falls is if there's not a lot of particulate pollution detected in real time, there's a kind of a beautiful blue waterfall. But as more and more particulate pollution is detected, that blue waterfall turns into a fireball. So here it is in Paris in conjunction with COP21, where the historic climate agreement was signed. And so it has been great to have this particulate sensor, but it's also been really interesting. And over in the course of 10 years, the devices that can measure particulate pollution have become more and more accessible using the hacker and maker space microprocessor kind of tools. So today, you can get a particulate sensor that's relatively good. You can make one yourself for about $30. You can buy one for a couple of $100. And that's been really wonderful and important to me. This is one example of a particulate sensor called the AirBeam that you can build. And so relatively soon after creating Particle Falls, I could create projects like this using 3 particulate sensors that are made out of these microprocessors and very inexpensive. So this is at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Zagreb, Croatia. And as I said, there are 3 particulate sensors, one for each of these LED screens. Using huge LED screens, fantastic. Using great big projectors, fantastic. I wanted to look for other types of technologies that would be low energy consumption and also inexpensive to purchase. So let me turn this down a little. So I started to work with LED strips, and this is a project called Skylight. It's at the Anderson Abruzzo Balloon Museum. It is currently visualizing wind speeds, which is really important for balloon launches. Over 5 miles per hour wind speed, you're not able to launch a balloon. And this is the site of Balloon Fiesta, where the city of Albuquerque doubles in size. And about 500,000 people come out for that. Another thing that I really wanted to do, so LED strips, very low power consumption, very inexpensive. But also I wanted to do more in terms of energy consumption and actually think about producing energy. And this came from a project that I did about 15 or 16 years ago now. It's a purely conceptual project about the Queensboro Bridge. I was living in Queens, traveling over this bridge every day to work in Manhattan, and looking at this bridge out my window every day. And at the same time, also looking at, I think I stopped counting at 20 or 30 smokestacks all throughout the city. And I started to think about, well, what if wind power, like wind turbines like this, could be placed in an aesthetic way and in urban areas. because I felt, my experience of wind turbines is that they're really beautiful. So, but again, 15 years ago, I took this as far as a engineering feasibility study, and found that it would cost about, I think it was about $3 million at that time, and the payback of the energy would be about 5 years. I ended up talking to the energy CFO of the energy company in New York about that, trying to pitch it, and the response that I got was that 5-year payback is too much for an energy project, which was really surprising to me. But I set this piece aside for a while. I worked with some engineers to design even more aesthetic wind turbines, these vertical turbines. They create less movement, so it would be better for a bridge. But I set this project aside until 2016, when I saw an opportunity to light a bridge in Pittsburgh, and also happened to be renamed the 9th Street Bridge, renamed the Rachel Carson Bridge by the mayor. And so I created this project called Energy Flow. I worked with a local wind power company creating custom vertical turbines. We put 16 turbines on the bridge and had information about wind power and its potential in Pittsburgh along the bridge. And what was really wonderful about this 15 years later was that my original idea for the Queensboro Bridge was just to provide the power to light the necklace lights on the bridge. But in 10 years, the technologies of low energy consumption LEDs had advanced so much that I could create a whole visualization platform for thinking about things like sea level rise and climate change. And I even was able to create a visualization, an ambient visualization, which you see here, which I like to call the rainbow rain, which is was a rainbow colored rain that speed and density was tied into wind power potential. So another great thing about this project, I thought, was that we created it with using hacker and maker tools. It was controlled by a cell phone. There were microprocessors on each of the bridge supports, about 52 microprocessors. And so when this happened in 2016, the U.S. pulled out of the climate agreement. And a tweet came out that said, I was elected by voters of Pittsburgh, not Paris, to which the mayor of Pittsburgh, Bill Peduto, did not think that this represented Pittsburgh and their ideals. They wanted to be they do want to be part of the climate agreement. So I got a call from the mayor's office, and within 24 hours, we were able to use our cell phones and turn the bridge green in support of the Paris climate agreement. So that for me was a really great outcome of using hacker maker tools and cell phones to control these kinds of projects. My programmer was in San Francisco. I was in New Mexico, and we were able to do this. Part of what came out of that project was a book called Hack the Grid. It talks about the history of some of these projects, but also other projects that are using technology in collaboration with air quality, climate, and environmental advocacy, including the Carnegie Mellon University Create Lab. So finally, in terms of strategies, one thing I've been really fortunate to be able to be a part of are helping to create collaborations within and between institutions and communities. I run a lab at the University of New Mexico called the Social Media Work Group. Out of that lab came a project called STEAM New Mexico, where we are raising capacity for STEAM education across the state. There's a lot of disparity in science and technology education in the state of New Mexico. Here we are on Navajo Nation, creating a project, working with Navajo artist Vinaya Yazi, and these are some of my student researchers. And the theme that we like to think about in the lab comes from Mark Weiser, who's a pioneer of ubiquitous computing, who said there's more information available at our fingertips during a walk in the woods than in any computer system. So we kind of question some of these ideas. We question what are the social and cultural effects of defining the natural and man-made environment as information space. How can and should a hybrid social media practice emerge and engage with the arid desert environment of the American Southwest and beyond? And what kinds of mobile, locative media, and ubiquitous computing platforms can help users engage with this environment, and how can this practice connect and extend to communities globally? So those are kind of what I academically said, our mottos are. And this came from one of our researchers. This is a quote from one of our researchers who said, technologically, we had no idea what we were doing. And I really like that also as a motto for the lab, because when you think about what do students want to do, and what I've discovered is they want to do what they've never done before. And that's what we try to do by coming up with kind of wild and crazy technology ideas. So finally, I just want to talk about some of the current and future directions of my work. I just completed a project in Tampa, Florida, and on the Riverwalk between the Convention Center and the Marriott. So it went live for the Super Bowl. These are some renders of the work, using, again, those LED strips and some of the construction drawings of the infrastructure. I wanted to highlight the interesting infrastructure under the bridge. And this is the piece as it stands. And this work is a little different from me because it doesn't respond to environmental data. It responds to the movement of people under the bridge. And it was inspired by, it's called BioBridge, and it was inspired by bioluminescent bacteria, which in many cases is problematic in the base or indicator of a imbalance. And so as people travel under this bridge, you can see the blue turns to this kind of neon green, and similar to how your body's disturbance would create light in a biobay with bioluminescent bacteria. So wanting to emphasize the human connection to some of these microbiological imbalances and balances that might happen. And finally, I am finishing a piece for the California Air Resources Board new headquarters, which are going to be in Riverside, California. So this is a render of the artwork. It's called Volatus, which is the name of a rolling cloud. And this is the artwork here in front of the building. And from the conference room, the California Air Resources Board is kind of a watchdog for air quality. They were the ones that discovered Volkswagen cheating on their onboard diagnostic computers for their emissions, and have since uncovered a number of other car companies that have been doing that. And they're really on the lookout for air quality, and they even have a sort of a courtroom in their new headquarters. So these are, again, some engineering drawings and some renders of the work. And this work was also inspired by the recent fires in California. I was really moved by some of the cell phone videos that people took as they were escaping, for example, Paradise, California. So the artwork will envelop people. You can walk through it and see visualizations of particulate pollution in real time, of course, often caused by fires. And in this case, we're using the Purple Air network. So Purple Airs are another one of these relatively inexpensive air quality monitoring devices that measure PM 2.5 and PM 10. And you can see there's an extensive network throughout California of Purple Airs. And so I'm going to end with, if I may, just a visualization. I apologize, it's really rough, but it is where part of our thinking about the visualization of the air quality data across the state. So the interior of the piece is going to have a kind of a red visualization that increases in intensity and speed as more particulate pollution is detected. And then the outside of the piece is using blues and whites to create more kind of a cloud as you see the piece. So that is it. So I will end it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was incredible. Wow, you've done so much incredible work.
Thank you.
Yes. There's been so many great comments and engagement from the viewers, and your work is really resonating with the community. So it's really wonderful to get to see kind of everyone's real-time excitement. So I just wanted to share that with you since we weren't adding it to the stream. And I know thanks for reserving some time for some questions. We've had some really great questions come through. So if that sounds good, I will start to share.
Sure, sounds great.
One of the questions that's coming from Carlota is kind of two-part. So I'll share them. I'll put them both up and then I'll read it out loud. So she asks, so many of our computer processes and technological parts used for installations have such a big carbon footprint. When trying to make artworks to spark climate awareness and action, is it possible to create art with sustainable and degradable materials that creates as much impact and attention as technology pieces can?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is, and that certainly, thank you, Carlotta, because that has certainly been a big challenge for me, and why I've been kind of moving towards more of these hacker and maker style devices that you can build. But certainly there needs to be more research into that. There's certainly some wonderful resources about, for example, cardboard cell phones, and their wonderful book called The Toaster Project, which was someone's PhD thesis where they tried to build a toaster from scratch and down to the minerals and metals that were used. And it's a really fascinating read about everything that we use and how big of a footprint there is. I think that, so things like these cell phone pieces, there's a dual use or multiple use of the phone. So it's the same phone that we're using daily can also be the platform that controls some of the installations rather than getting new computers. But yeah, I mean, I would applaud anyone here that can work towards that. It's so important.
Yeah, it's a great question. We've over the years of as an artist and also working with other artists in the field who are trying to do grapple with this, there's a lot of different potential approaches. Some try to focus primarily on reused materials. Some try to focus primarily on materials that have a very long life cycle and that they don't degrade in a way that is going to inherently hurt the environment. Some offset the carbon and make sure that their piece has full modularity and there's a way to, put it back at the end in a way that's responsible and that's baked into the design. There was also an artist, just that comes to mind, I feel like you would appreciate. One of the members of the Design Science Studio, Justina Salnikova, she did an installation on Planet Home, which is an event that was for Planetary Solutions. And there was an installation all about precious plastic. And one of her teammates had actually spent some time in Tibet with Thich Nhat Hanh Center doing this like communal meditation, thanking plastic for the resource and apologizing for utilizing it in such a poor way, because it's something that lasts for 500 years. And so it like brought an awareness to the creators who were working with her around just like a shift in relationship, instead of like, having such a disdain, just like really acknowledging it for its lifespan and seeing how to use it in the right way. Like there's planes wouldn't be possible. There's body parts people wouldn't be able, so there's certainly different perspectives.
I really love Amy Balkin's work in this area too. She has a project called Public Smog, where she buys carbon credits on the trade, the carbon trading system in the EU was having, and then retires them. So her work is often very much about kind of navigating complex legal systems and policies, and it's just fascinating and wonderful.
Beautiful. Noted. So another question comes from one of our Indigenous artists, Amber Bassett, who asks, what informs your approach to technology and data as a medium of communication? Do you have to cultivate partnerships in technology to make these works possible in navigating limitations?
Let me take a minute to try and understand what my perspective would be on that. I spoke a little bit about that with the quote from about ubiquitous computing. I think that the interpretation of kind of this massive glut of data that we have now is really important, and it's really important for artists to be a part of that interpretation. So I think that's where I would fall in terms of an approach to technology and data, trying to, without watering down or changing the data, how can we actually make the data understandable and maybe emotionally touching to people. And then in terms of cultivating partnerships with technology, certainly I have been collecting some data from the weather stations, for example, and from the sensors that I do have, but I'm not a specialist in gathering data or generating data models and things like that. So I certainly have to collaborate with scientists mostly, and meteorologists and climate and atmospheric scientists.
Mm-hmm. And are there any maybe like kernels of wisdom that you can share through your collaborations with these scientists and data experts that other artists listening in could consider as they're beginning to integrate data into their work?
Well, I think you should not be afraid of approaching scientists, and just know that they can be, and even the highest scientists at the highest level, read the papers, do the searches, find someone who may be doing something that's relevant to the areas that you're interested in, and approach them. And my strategy is usually, well, if they say no, I will ask, do they have anyone else that you might work with, or that they might recommend someone for you to contact. I have found very much that scientists are super excited about working with artists. I've had scientists say to me when I was in Antarctica, "Oh, you're going to make me famous," but also, that idea that there are things that you can say that the scientist would like to say, but they can't really say in their field for fear of not being taken seriously. And I think we don't have, thankfully, the same kind of war on science now as we have had, but it's still, scientists are still concerned about how their work is taken seriously.
Yeah, there's another question that comes from Laura, kind of building on this collaboration with scientists, so I'll just weave it in. So have there been instances in these collaborations where your point of view impacted their research insights?
Somewhat, in the sense of like with the sonification work, the scientists have felt that they've been able to hear things in the sonification that they knew was in the data, but didn't. They were just surprised that they could hear something that they knew was in the data and experience it in that way. But probably not as much, maybe as people talk about. I'm not in terms of art science collaboration. I mean, I think there's a certain place where people say, well, it's only true art science collaboration if the artist is impacting the science and directly, and that's measurable. And I don't really believe that. I think there are a wide range of possible art science collaborations, and the goal of the artist doesn't have to always be, I need to impact the science. And in fact, I think sometimes when artists have gone to labs or gone into art science collaboration situations with that kind of an attitude, or with an attitude of, I'm going to critique what these scientists don't understand, what they're doing or whatever. That is really a place that I have seen has closed down possible collaborations. I've really found that scientists have been working on these problems and have been thinking about them very deeply, and have considered a lot of the potential problems.
One question that I have for you, kind of building on that, is there's this, from the different examples that you showed of your work, it seems like some have closer proximity to the actual conceptual backing that people can engage with, and some maybe there's they have to kind of dig deeper to find out the richness with which you've created. And I'm curious for all the creators listening here, what strategies you have found most effective for helping translate the scientific backing and the concepts behind your work, when sometimes they are kind of big, and that can mean there's a little bit of spatial separation from engaging with the conceptual frameworks of why you've created them.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I have really been fortunate to have worked with some advocacy groups, and I think that has been just so important for the work and getting the ideas to the public. So specifically, I'll give one example. The Clean Air Carolina is an advocacy organization in North Carolina, and I've had the opportunity to show Particle Falls with them as support in 4 times throughout the state in different cities. And they will coordinate things at the same time as legislative meetings, for example, that where issues related to air quality are being voted on. And so I have felt really great to be able to have particle falls actually have a real impact by raising awareness of some local air quality issues that people are having. So, but for me anyway, I don't have the time to create an advocacy organization and do all this work. So to have that collaboration happen has been really wonderful.
Amazing. That's a really powerful story, and I really appreciate the kind of collaboration embedded within it. There's actually another question that's about community engagement and collaboration. Let me find it. It fits really well. Here it is. Great. So Skata asks, can you share your ideas of the intersection of art and science as a way of community engagement and visualizing a collective future?
Thank you. I love your terminology of visualizing a collective future. And for me, I was involved in a project called New York 2050, and I think it happened soon after 9/11. It was organized by a group of us in New York, including city planners and architects and artists, and I was kind of there as a media artist, and we and the group organized these big public brainstorming sessions. Maybe you saw after 9/11, there were big public brainstorming sessions about how to rebuild the World Trade Center site. Well, people wanted to continue that process by having brainstorming sessions about New York City as a whole and thinking about 50 years in the future, with an idea that, 50 years is far enough away that something really wild could happen, but close enough that we could kind of imagine it. We might still be alive at that time. And so it was really fun because I was both an organizer and also a participant. And I started visualizing and imagining New York in 50 years for myself. And that's actually where the Queensboro Bridge project came out of. So that was just an idea that developed. And then I took it further as a conceptual idea. And lo and behold, less than 50 years later, just 15 years later, I was able to do it in Pittsburgh. So I think that visualizing the collective future is huge. And there's all kinds of wonderful exercises that we developed of visualizing together and imagining and then drawing. And I think doing that would, in a large scale, would be really transformative. And thanks for that question.
Yeah, it's a great question. So it's a lot of the work of the Design Science Studio as well. The artists are really working towards visualizing this collective future, and in that process, it's very iterative. So building. Many artists have been working towards this for a long time. Some are working on it for the first time, or at least directing their creative efforts towards that for the first time. So it's very helpful to kind of hear your perspectives on it and how it's worked for you. So I'm really grateful for the question and also for all of your experience. Mansoor, who is the patron of the Living Systems Collaboratory, asks, can we monitor the collective sound of our living planet by observing its changes and self-organizing process?
Well, I would recommend that you read Murray Schafer's Tuning the World. He wrote in the 70s, translated into every language you can imagine around the world, and incredibly important. I think R. Murray Schafer is kind of the Buckminster Fuller of the acoustic ecology world. And he really talks about that in an incredibly eloquent way. And out of that grew the World Soundscape Project. And there's currently the World Forum for Acoustic Ecology and acoustic ecology organizations connected to the World Forum all over the world. So if you're interested in that, I would definitely get connected to those organizations.
Fascinating. It sounds like that was potentially really impactful for your work with your sonic environments as well, that publication.
Yeah, and getting together with other people who care about soundscapes and wanted to join this acoustic ecology movement.
Amazing. One of the scientists and researchers in the collaboratory asks Ilaria Forte, how would you define your interdisciplinary process in a nutshell? What are the foundational elements to support interdisciplinary collaboration?
Well, these are just some amazing questions.
We have the most amazing artists.
Yeah.
There's other people from the public too, but a lot of these are coming from the studio.
Yeah. Gosh, how to approach that? I mean, there are just so many things, and so how to put it into a nutshell. I mean, I think cultivating mutual respect of each other's background and skill. I mean, I think that goes beyond interdisciplinary just to any kind of collaboration or community work with communities, to have that mutual respect and cultivating that, both in the sense of kind of insisting on it for for yourself as an artist and your skills, but also having the respect of the for the collaborator coming from another discipline. And yeah, I was kind of going to say that it's about the personalities at first. That's kind of the first thing that I thought of. But I think if you take that further, it is more about can you respect each other's work and give each other the space to make the work that is needed to make. So for example, in an interdisciplinary collaboration, you as an artist may get something out of the collaboration that's completely different than what a scientist or a social scientist or a humanities scholar get out of the collaboration. But you have to, that in itself makes the collaboration that much richer. Yeah.
One of the things I really appreciate about your telling of your work is that, you describe there's the train. You describe the Pittsburgh project as in like a temporal scale of, 15 years, but it seems like so close also in the way that you describe it. And so I feel like your approach to your art making really has this almost like earth scale more to it. We tend to think in such short terms, and even as creators. And so I'm curious if you can share a little bit more about your approach to long developmental projects, and then how you're sharing your process and not just your product.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's something that is part of a grand plan or anything for me. I really didn't think that I would ever get a chance to light a bridge with wind power. Once it kind of, well, I guess, let me say this. I understood back 15 years ago when I was trying to make this project happen, how little I knew. For example, one of the things that the engineers talked to me about is a feasibility study. And they said, put a weather station on top of the bridge where you want to put these turbines and gather that data for at least a year. And that's your feasibility study. And I was like, I had never had a weather station before and gathered data. And that was really one of the things that drove me to get those weather stations and start that Hello Weather project. But I guess if you're asking about a philosophy of that, like maybe there is there's sort of a long game, but then there's the idea that, well, I need to learn how to use a weather station. And the way I'm going to do that is by doing a project that is an art project and that, can get me to the next step sort of thing. So I think that's maybe the philosophy, because there's so much to learn and it takes so much time. And then can you figure out a way in the interim while you're learning these things to continue being an artist and continue getting your work out, and as you say, share your process.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for that. We have, I think, time for one more question, which comes from Gina Bria. who asks, Andrea, can you suggest a next step for moving art into community policy? Can you name some typical city agencies you reach out to or science organizations?
Hmm. Hmm. I mean, I think starting local is, or being local is really important. I know there are cities that don't have, for example, public art programs, but it can be so. But if a city is small and doesn't have a public art program, you can lobby and advocate for that at a minimum. But then you can also, if there is a public art program, though they are usually very accessible, and you can talk to them about some of these issues. Of course, right now what we're seeing is a rethinking of the monuments that are filling our cities and covering our cities and representing, in many cases, things that for many of our community members are really horrific. You know, here in New Mexico, the sculpture of Oñate, for example, has gone down, who was a conquistador who created incredible suffering of the native people here. So that dialogue on a local level, I think, is really important. But you know, the community or the public art programs that are part of the city are part of city government, and so that's a place where I think there's a lot of important communication that can happen. I've been really pleased to see what the National Science Foundation has been doing for promoting a wider range of diversity and promoting inclusion for underrepresented groups in science. It's an imperative, I think, for the country to remain competitive in the sciences, to really be open to wherever great insight is going to come from. And I think that's where the Science Foundation is standing now. So that's just one example that I know, but I think many of the other agencies are also moving in that direction in a positive way.
Beautiful. I'm so glad that you shared also about the rethinking of our city monuments. One of the visionaries who came to speak to the Design Science Studio, Esther Berlin, who is a Native American artist.
Oh, Esther! I collaborate with Esther.
Yeah, so she helped us really think through our monuments and gave some really powerful resources. I love that you know each other. That's so cool.
She worked on the project with Vinaya Yazzie, so I showed the picture of Vinaya, and Esther was also part of that project.
Incredible. All the world's glad. I got chills. That's beautiful. Yeah, and then also also for speaking to how the sciences, at least in the National Science Foundation, is working towards promoting diversity and inclusion, and are working to collaborate with artists. And so I think that's a really good insight, and leaves us on a tone of much hope as we transition out of this wonderful talk. And thank you so much for making the time and for your dedication to this work. It's really a beacon, and we're so honored to have you with us, and excited to keep collaborating with you over the design science decade. And yeah, I'm sure that many artists would love to connect with you afterwards as well.
It's inspiring to me to learn about that this group is here and so engaged. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And yeah, definitely check the chat whenever you get a chance after the fact. There are so many comments that are in here, just celebrating your wonderful work. So with that, we will close the stream. Thank you again, and we look forward to collaborating more in the future.
Bye-bye. Have a great day, everybody.
Bye.